All right, everybody. Welcome to InRhythm Lightning Talks for this week. As you may know, each week we have a member of our practices come and give their thoughts on the latest technology. This week, I'm going to present to you some information on Flyway for doing database migrations. And just as a quick reminder, every Thursday at 5:15 Eastern, we do have the Lightning Talks. We hope you'll join us for next week. So without further ado, I will start talking to you about Flyway. Let me just share my screen and we'll get started. And for the people on Zoom, if you can give me a thumbs up on if you've ever used Flyway before, that'd be great. Just kind of curious how many people maybe have used it before. Not seeing anybody. Okay, that's fine. So let me tell you a little bit about Flyway. It's used for doing some database migrations. And it's a really great tool. It's very lightweight, easy to get going with. Oh, there's Rob. I think he said he has used it. Great, thank you. I've had the good fortune to use it on a project or two. It's really great. One of the cool things about it is it can work with pretty much any relational database. So because the migrations really just run your standard SQL scripts. However, you can do more advanced things as well with some of their Java libraries. So Flyway, though, has 7 basic commands. Those are migrate, clean, info, validate, undo, baseline, and repair. But today we're going to really focus on migrate and maybe touch a little bit on clean. So for those that are unaware, Flyway has been around since early 2015 and was acquired by Redgate in 2019. There's still a version of it that is free to use, but there's also a kind of more enterprise version of it that you can get from Redgate. So first off, let's look at the commands that you can run. So as I was saying, migrate's what we're going to look at mostly. And if you're utilizing Flyway, this is probably the command you're going to use most often. So this is what's going to help you keep your schema up to date. So this is going to be anytime you want to run a SQL script out to your database. Maybe you want to create new tables, you want to update your views, or store procedures, add data. That's what the migrate is going to let you do. Clean is really helpful for when you're doing testing early on, and or if you wrote something out and you see that your scripts didn't run quite like you thought you wanted them to do, because this is going to, when you run the clean command, it's going to drop all the objects from your database and put it back to nothing. So you do have to be careful with that. It's not something you'd want to run in production, but it is something that can be very handy for your local testing and in QA. Info will give you more details about the status of your migrations. And the validate will help you compare what just went out along with your local database and check the various pieces to make sure things are matching. It does some checks on some checksums, and it gets a little bit more complex. Undo allows you to undo the most recent version that you've applied. So as you'll see here in a few minutes when I show you some of the files, you'll see that they have version numbers. And as you apply them, for instance, you may have applied just version 6, and then you realize there's a mistake and you need to go back to 5. The undo command will help you do that. The baseline is very instrumental when you want to introduce Flyway to your existing database, because it'll help you get a baseline of where your database currently is, and to kind of know that that is where you would want to go back to. And then repair helps you repair various things with your schema history. But again, we're not going to go into most of those today, but I would encourage you, if you decide to go use this or play with it a little bit more, to go and look at those in more details. All right, so how often have you guys asked yourself, like, or ever had to do these types of things, like modify your tables, your views, your store procedures, maybe populate data in your database, run a migration script? I know these are things I seem to do constantly. You know, as we do more and more things that are database driven, it's just hard to get away with not doing this sort of stuff. So Flyway is really here to help make our lives much easier. And having used some of Redgate's other tools for doing data migration, I have to say I really like the way Flyway does it a little bit better. It seems a little easier and a little bit more straightforward. So what are some of the ways we can use Flyway? Yeah, that is, how do we execute it, if you will? So probably the most straightforward way is actually from the command line. So from the command line, we can do a real simple Flyway migrate, and we give it, we can either tell it where our config file is, or we can tell it where the URL is to our database, our username, password, what command we want to do. So in our example here, they're actually going to run the migrate command. All these examples are doing migrate, but you can easily change that to be clean or whatever else. So they also, like I said, have tools to integrate with Java. So there's a whole library that you can, or a set of objects you can instantiate there in Java. It makes it really handy. Also, if you're using Maven or Gradle, there are integrations right into that as well. So today, actually, I want to talk to you about using Flyway with Docker, which basically uses the command line interface as you utilize it. So in my opinion, Docker with Flyway is like one of the best ways to go. Because it not only helps you get a database up and going really quickly, that will be just like what you're running out for production. So it, it just lets you as a developer be able to spin this up really quickly on your local environment into your QA environment, easy to roll out. So the combination of these two, in my opinion, is just really great. And it's so simple to do. Once you have a few scripts in place, then you can go use your Docker Compose up with your script file, and boom, you're running it within moments. Usually they come up in seconds even. So I'm going to show you an example of my Docker config file. Hopefully you guys can see that okay. And I'll show you a real one here in just a minute. This is just a screenshot from mine. What we've put in here is we've defined a service for the Flyway. I went ahead and gave it a container name. You really don't have to in the case of Flyway, because this is going to spin up for just a moment or two, really, as it runs, and then it'll shut right down. But I've told it to use the latest image from Flyway, but you can use an older version or a specific version if you wanted to. And then I've given it some commands. So in the commands, this is just like if I were running from the command line prompt. So I've told it to use a config file, and in my config file, I have things defined like where the database connection is, what the username is, password, that sort of thing. I've also told it how many times I want to connect and do retries. I chose 42 because if anyone's read Douglas Adams' books, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, 42 is the answer. And then I also added an extra flag in here that's really handy for testing things out. It's called validate migration naming, and I set that to true. And the reason I set that to true is because sometimes, or rather, one of the biggest problems I've ran into so far is the naming of our files, which we'll talk more about in here in just a minute. And this really helps you debug that. And lastly, the command migrate, which is what we're wanting to do. We're wanting to migrate some data to this. And there's a couple more things in here. These things called volumes. And the volumes are just really mapping where things are to the Docker container. So for instance, the first one there with the PWD, BB, Flyway, SQL, that's just showing you like my local drive with the full URL or full path to my local drive for where the SQL files are, what it's going to map to into the Docker container itself. And then lastly, I put a depends on, and in this case, we want the database to be up and running. So we want that dependency there. So next, let's think about how this works. So effectively what happens is that when you run the migrate when you run migrate, Flyway is going to add a table to your database if it's not there already, called Flyway schema history. And in there, it's going to keep track of what things need to be applied to your database. So it's going to look at version files, undo files, and repeatable files. So the version files are all the ones that they're going to start with the letter V, plus a couple underscores, and then a description. And so these are going to be the scripts where you typically have things that you only really want to run one time. So like maybe it's creating your table. It could be inserting that initial data into your database. It could be creating your stored procedures. So that, again, it's usually things you only want to run one time. For instance, maybe you're adding a column to a table, right? Then you have an undo script. Now these get a little tricky, and digging into the documentation, it sounds like the folks at Flyway and Redgate kind of say, maybe you don't want to rely on these too much. But in theory, it lets you undo a particular script. And it has a similar naming component as the version. Instead of a V, it starts with a U. And then lastly, we have repeatable files. And so repeatable files are actually really good for things that might change from time to time and need to be reran. So things like what a stored procedure looks like, or a view, or maybe you're going to populate a data definition table, something like where you store like enums defined or things like that. And so these are also special in that they start with the letter R, but there's no number with them, but they have the R and the 2 underscores. And then in the database, it's actually going to store a checksum of that. And then later when you go and run, it's going to compare that checksum of the file to what it currently is, along with the date and time, and determine if it should rerun that file or not. Right, so all that sounds really good and all, but what's the catch, right? So as I have mentioned kind of earlier, sometimes you can have issues with the versioning. And if we look over here at, you'll see I have a list of files here as we look here. And so we're going to look at them as a person and we say, okay, so we have ham shack radio. Okay, that doesn't meet our definition. It doesn't start with a V or an R or an S. Okay, that guy's going to be dropped out. We're going to ignore it. But then everything else here starts with one of those letters, right? Like we've got a lowercase r double underscore inventory info, and we have an uppercase r double underscore sales info. So, those look like they would probably run. We've got these undo files. If we look here, we've got, 1.1, 2.0, 2.1. All those look like they're in good order. Same thing with our first files, or the V files, right? So everything looks great. However, when you go and run this, or if you were to go run this against your folder, you'll see that some of these files do not run. So in particular, what's going to happen is it's going to match the pattern that it runs to first. So if the first one, like on the V's, if it has the V1.1 of the version file, and it's capital V, then when it encounters a lowercase v, it's going to ignore it. And so we'd have several files there that would not get ran. And you could end up pulling out your hair going like, what's going on? Or like I did a couple of days ago, when I was re-reviewing this, I forgot that the repeatable files don't have numbers, and I had put like version numbers with them, and then I realized, that it doesn't work. So that goes back to that command, to that flag I showed you guys a few minutes ago. It helps you diagnose those issues and move on. So my number one tip with Flyway as you get started with it is to think about how you want to version your files, and make that a standard to always use it. So whether that's an uppercase letter first or lowercase, that's up to you guys. One place we were at, we used padded numbers where we just did like 4 digits as a version number, so like 0001. Or if you want to have dots in there, either of those will work. But really think about how that pattern is, and give that a little bit of thought when you first start up. So what I want to do now, though, is show you guys a short demo. So let me see if I can switch over to my code editor here. Give me just a second. Right. And let's see, hopefully you guys are seeing my code editor. Anyone give me a heads up or a thumbs up if they are?
Yeah, we can see it.
Awesome, great. All right, is it big enough or do I need to make it bigger?
A little bigger would be nice.
A little bigger? Okay, let me see if I can do that. Let's see. I can remember where that's at. Let me see. I think Sorry, guys, I don't remember where that command is right now. So anyways, I tell you what, let me make it just full screen there. Maybe that'll help. So again, this is my Docker Compose file. And as I showed you guys earlier, I have it named Flyway. It could be, you can name it whatever you want to name it. I did put this validate migration name to true to help me debug. I've got my database defined here, and this is all just a Docker Compose YAML file. And then I actually have in here too, because I'm testing, I've actually added a clean database piece as well. So this also hits the same Flyway image. And in this case, I have the clean command in here. And also I've got another flag in here. So this is called clean disabled. And I set that to false. By default, that is set to true. And so, but this allows me to override that so that I can do the cleanse here when I run this particular compose or Docker compose up. So, and if anyone's played with Docker much at all, you know that if you just do a general Docker compose up, it usually brings up everything at one time. But one thing you can do is you can add profiles, and I created a profile called CleanDB. And by having that profile on that one, but not having it on these other two, when I do the Docker compose up, it will ignore the clean piece. It's great because I don't want it to do that. And then let's look over here, shift over to my database for just a second. Hopefully you'll be able to see it. Click the wrong thing. Let's pull this out a little bit and we'll try to do a refresh. Should tell me that we're not connected right now. I did get a connection refused there. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to bring up both the database. Well, yeah, I'll bring up the database first. And without running Flyway. All right, so that should be up. And then now should be able to do a refresh. And I have nothing in there because I haven't ran Flyway just yet. Now we'll run this. And so that should have just ran scripts that we have. Now we have tables, right? I'll show you those. I'll show you over here. I've got my scripts defined in my system here. We go to the our query console and select from data definition types. And here I have different types of users defined. You can see some of the users. You see I have, these are actually a bunch of authors of books. Maybe some of you know them, maybe you don't. And then also I'll show you, I'll show you what the history looks like. So here we have the migration history or Flyway schema history, and we can see the version files like 101, 1.02, that it ran these different files, right? So like in my 1.01, I created the table DD types. And the second one, we created the table users. And then the fourth one, we inserted sample users, right? And then I want to show you the repeatable here for just a second. So on the repeatable, this is where I have user data types coming in. And, you know, I'll tell you that the repeatable doesn't have a version number. And we see here, we don't have a version number on it. It's the fifth one here. It gets added after all your version files. So something else you got to remember about your repeatables is that it may not be good for something that you need in your earlier files, right? Like if you need something defined, you need to remember that repeatables run after all your version files. So anyways, in this first version of the repeatable file, I inserted 3 user types. So inserted the user, a CSR, and an admin, but I did not insert the SVE. And we can verify that over here. Right, so we've only got 3. Right, so but then I can come back over here and I can just uncomment these. Right, and then I can go back to my console really quickly. And I can just rerun Flyway here. And now when I come back into my console and check it. Now I have the developers there. It caught that there was a change in the file. And if we look at the history, we'll now see an extra entry for that file where it did the repeatable, and we can see the checksum was different. So again, it noticed that there was a change. And it's really that easy. And that's going to be, those two commands are probably going to be the ones you use the most, the migrate, maybe the clean. And so really that's it that I have to share with you guys today. Just wonder if anybody has any questions. Now's a good time. Oh, let me see what the chat says. Let's see. Chat says John Watson on LinkedIn. He said, just notice that you're using a Mac. So thanks, John. Those were the commands to increase and decrease the font size. Thanks. I'll keep that in mind. Does anyone have any questions about using the Flyway?
Hey, Ted, Nikhil here. I have one question around why do enterprise applications or enterprise software development teams, they don't adopt Flyway against other enterprise Postgres, MySQL, or other databases? Why don't they go for it?
Well, that I'm not sure. So Flyway itself is not a database, right? So it is a tool for doing migrations, and it works with pretty much all relational databases. So now they do have a competitor out now that's called Localbase. And I've not looked at that one yet. I do need to take a look at it. And Redgate used to have some tools, or they have some tools, and they've been kind of changing it up a little bit. But their tools initially were primarily focused on SQL Server, which I've used a lot in the past. And in fact, John, who shared that tip, he worked with me on a project and also using that as well. The project we were using or tool we were using for was a little bit more flaky, and I think it was smarter Redgate to pick up Flyway. It does feel a lot more straightforward and a lot easier for developers to use and just really integrate into their source code. But why so many have not adopted it yet, I'm not entirely sure. Because it is a big problem to figure out, like, how can I rebuild my database, in a specific order, perhaps. And a tool like Flyway can really make that quite a bit easier to use.
Okay.
Yeah, let's see. Oh, apparently John has said that it requires discipline on the part of the team and to author the scripts, and also requires that Flyway is run at the start of deployments in each environment. That is true. And so last year I got to build a microservice. Sidso and I did, and a couple other folks, and we implemented Flyway there. And we were running everything in Docker containers, and then running those out into Kubernetes to do some EC2 instances based off those containers. And so we had it all as part of that process as everything would run, that we would, bring up the database, then we would hit Flyway, and all that would happen before our application came up. Yeah, let me see. It looks like Danny might have a question here. You're seeing gotchas when folks want to run non-schema changes, example, migrating data from one table to another. I've not ran into any gotchas with that just yet, but Dan, I'm not sure if you heard me say this earlier or not. You would want that to be a versioned command instead of a repeatable command. It kind of depends on what you're doing, because the version files rather will happen before the repeatables do. But the repeatables are a really good place for things like your stored procedures, your views that you would change from time to time. And actually the file I was trying to show a few minutes ago, I'll see if I can bring it back up. In this case, I was doing data types, right? So I had preloaded some data types, and then I was adding a data type. That one can get tricky though, depending on how you have your schema set up. If you're really enforcing normalization, then you would have to make sure that this new type for SVE got in place before you try to insert any data that would use that, right? But hopefully this would be something you wouldn't see go out until the application itself went out, and then someone's trying to use it. So ideally, this file would have already been ran. Let me see what else we got. Let's see. Oh, looks like John Watson is saying that he thinks that the .NET's entity framework may have stolen some of this from Flyway. Yeah, could be. All right. Is there any other questions or anything else you guys would like to see? Like, if you want, I can tear down the database. I didn't show you guys that. Now that I think about it, I will show you that really fast. I told you about the clean. So we saw that we have a database. So let me do, hopefully you can see this. We do Docker compose, if I can spell. And I'm going to do the clean DB, right? Now this almost always gives me a network error. I haven't figured that issue out just yet, but I have been trying to work on that, but it should have. I ran away the tables, but it did not. Okay, so I have gotten that to work. That part's a little bit tricky, it seems like to me. But like I said, I have seen it work though. Let me do this real quick. I've found that sometimes you have to do it kind of quickly to each other. So if I say Docker compose down DB, but that was it. Of course, nothing's this acting up now, right? All right, now if I bring up the DB again real fast. And shoot, I forgot to run that in the background. I'll run my clean. Okay, why is it not liking it? Oh, that's my bad. Gotta say up. And you gotta remember to say -db. And so now if I refresh the database over here, everything is gone. So again, that reset it back. So what you would really only want to do locally, like local dev or QA. So, but then bringing it back up is super easy at that point. So then I can now rerun, repopulate everything, right? So, oops. Anyway, good spell. Whoops. Always happens when people are watching you, right? So there we go. We've reran it. And now we have our tables back again, and all our scripts should be there. So again, now we can look at our history again. We've got it. Got our users and our types, users, looking good. All right. Hey, thank you, everyone. I'll get any last questions before we go? All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Just as a quick reminder, every Thursday at 5:15 Eastern, 4:15 Central, we have a lightning talk. We are also in the middle of our spring summit series, where we're putting on a series of workshops. We've already had 4 great workshops. We had 2 this week, a double shot. One was from our iOS team and one was from our DevOps team. We'll have those up on YouTube for you to view pretty soon, and some documents on those. And next week, we're skipping the week for our workshop, but in 2 weeks, we will have another set of 2 in 1 week. One will be from our Android team, and the other will be from the Cloud Native Applications team, where I will run you through a workshop on using gRPC. And also next week, we have a lightning talk from one of our DevOps folks. It's going to be on Jenkins with our DevOps engineer, Vamshi Kutha. And that should be a really great talk. I hope to see you at 5:15 Eastern next week. Until then, have a great evening.